Welcome to an episode of the Rabbi and The Shrink. This is Dr. Margarita Gurri, the Shrink, and my favorite rabbi,
Yonason Goldson.
Well, the good rabbi and I have with you a high performance concierge coach. Her name is Dr. Robin Odegaard. Welcome, Dr. Robin.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Now, since you're high performance, you don't mind me bragging about you a little bit, right?
I would love it if you would.
So in Spanish, we have a saying, pobrecita no tiene abuela, which means poor thing doesn't have a grandmother, which means if there's a grandmother around, she brags about you, so you don't have to. So I'm going to brag a little bit. I think we have a very interesting thinker here. Dr. Robin comes from the world of competitive beach volleyball. And she learned the hard way about what it's like to not have people have high expectations of you because you're, and I'm putting words in your mouth, because you're young, you're beautiful, you're female, the way people look at you, and you're not very braggy, so you don't maybe come across showing off who you are. And you use that in a very thoughtful way to be quite a thoughtful thinker. You've created a bunch of programs. You're a speaker. You have a TEDx program about creating success out of chaos, which right now, everyone must be very happy because there's been a lot of chaos. So I'm sure you're busier than ever before. And you have your PsyD in organizational psychology, and you've written 3 books. The titles I'm going to read because I love them. Stop the Drama, The Ultimate Guide to Female Teams. Oh, well, thank you, Dr. Robin. And the next one, The Ultimate Guide to Handling Every Disagreement Every Time. I like that. And How to Feed a Human the Whole Food Muscle Way. All right, very cool. Just got many, many years in the corporate world and many years as a coach. Welcome, and tell us, please, about what you do. What makes you a concierge high-performance psychology coach?
Yeah, so people sometimes call me a crisis coach. Sometimes they'll say that. Sometimes people will say that I create success out of chaos by being a smoke jumper, like I parachute in and help fight life's fires from the inside. I have a client who says that I'm the rock for the rocks. In her world, she has to hold everything together. And if she's not holding it together, then she's like, you got to help me. And so, those are the kind of things that I do. I've been really fortunate that people trust me with their lives, like the stories people tell me. So for example, last fall, I had someone call me just out of the blue on a Saturday. And he said, Robin, you have to help me. My dad just went on life support and I'm the executor. You have to help me decide if I'm going to kill my dad.
Oh,
and so I get, when I talk to other coaches, they always say, Robin, I know when to send somebody to you because I don't want the crisis. I don't want the chaos. I don't want the crazy. So that makes me different in that way.
I must say, I get my, go ahead, Rabbi.
It's a fascinating skill set to have because, Dr. Richard and I often observe that we're a good partnership because I'm a big picture person and she's a detail person. She also handles crises very well. And
thank you, sir.
I'm perfectly happy to allow others to take that over. It's good to know there are people in the world who can do that because we need you.
Yeah, it is a good skill set. And I think then it helps you provide a trusting bond with somebody so that they can move forward to their high performance lives, which is, I think, lovely. So let me ask this. Why is it most of us never achieve our true high performance potential?
That is a really loaded question.
Well, thank you.
A lot of it is, I think, if you've ever read the book, The Big Leap, I think we upper limit ourselves. I think at some point in our lives, we were told you're allowed to be this successful, you're allowed to be this happy. And so we have that voice in our head that says, oh, I shouldn't do this, or I can't do this, or I've tried that, that's going to fail. Or we have an external voice. I know I have family members who are like, oh, you shouldn't do that. Who do you think you are? And we believe that. And so we never really go out and succeed. How do I explain it in a good way? It's easy to be mediocre because if you don't try, you can't fail. So if you only ever try to do the things you know you can do, you're never going to achieve those stretch goals.
When Cain brings his offering to God, and it's not accepted. The sages explain that he brought not the best of his produce. His brother brought the best of his, and his was accepted. Cain figured, well, what's the point? God's not going to eat it anyway. He's not going to eat my tomatoes, so I might as well keep the good stuff for myself. And he's upset that he's not recognized. And God comes to him and says that if you do well, if you do what you're capable of doing, you will be recognized. And if not, sin is crouching at the door. And in Judaism, the doorway is a symbol of transition. And transition's hard. We like to stay in our comfort zones. So when we approach a door in life, any point of opportunity or potential growth, there's this little voice saying, don't do it. It's too risky. It's not worth it. It's not worth taking a chance. Just stay where you're comfortable. And then if we get through the door, another voice starts saying, wow, look what you accomplished. Isn't that wonderful? You can rest now. But really what we should be doing is always looking for the next doorway to go through.
After you do pat yourself on the back, give yourself a minute.
Yeah, you get a minute. And then it's time
And
to move
without
on.
getting demoralized that there's more and more and more, you know. See, my dog is my high performance coach. You see her in the background.
Aw.
She helps me always keep going for the next and not take ourselves too seriously that our failures are what we're capable of. It's only the invitation for more. So let's say someone in the audience is struggling with the issue of wanting to or thinking they deserve to be high performance. What do you say, Dr. Robin?
Well, so the first thing you have to do is figure out what is it you want. So I had kind of a 5-step paradigm that I kind of help people walk
good.
through.
What is it?
I would love to share it with you. So the first thing is, what do I want? What is my goal? And a lot of times when you ask people that, they're like, well, I don't know. I don't have a goal. So then flip it around. Well, what is not working right now? Where are you right now that isn't making you happy, that isn't giving you fulfillment? Because if you can sometimes we're better about talking about what's negative. And if you can talk about what's negative, then you can say, okay, now I have a goal. I want that to stop happening. Well, what does that look like? So figure out your goal. What is it you want to have happen? And if you have to look at the negative, do that. Then the second piece of it is, okay, what's my strategy? What's my plan? And you have to do problem deconstruction, because now you've got this big goal, but you got to figure out, how do I break it down into something that's actually doable? So what's the first step? And the suggestion I like to give people is your first step could fit into 2 categories. One, it should be small enough that you can take it, and if it doesn't work, you can back out of it. So don't take a huge step and then be like, well, now I'm stuck out here. This didn't work. Small step that'll give you information. That's the first piece. Got to give you information. Am I on the right path? And is it small enough that if it doesn't work, I can back out of it? So figure out your strategy, take a small step that gives you information if you're heading the right way. The next piece is knowledge or skills. What do I need to know or be able to do that I can't currently? And that doesn't mean, oh, I have to go out and learn it. Let me go spend 10 years in school. Because a lot of people get stuck in the knowledge and skill space because they spend all kinds of time learning and they never actually take action. So it might make sense for you to hire someone. For example, if you need someone with my skill set, could you learn to do what I do? Sure. Give yourself 15 years. You could probably do what I do, but hire me. We can get you through the process in 3 months, 6 months. So look at the skills and knowledge that you need, find out, should you hire someone or should you learn it? Sometimes it makes sense to hire someone. Those are kind of the 3 easy parts. The next piece is your psychological barriers. And I'm sure, doctor, you see this. These are the saboteurs, the upper limiting, the things that tell me, oh, I can't do that. I shouldn't do that. Oh, I tried that. It didn't work. Whatever. What are your psychological barriers? And sometimes the hardest part is recognizing them. So have a conversation with someone, bring someone in that's going to help you recognize your psychological barriers and then hold you accountable to overcoming them. And the last piece, people, places, things, and habits that either help or hurt. Very often we have habits in our lives we don't even recognize are limiting our ability to succeed. So that's something I like to look at with clients. So that's my kind of 5-step paradigm. And they don't have to go in that order. That's just the order they're in my brain, but that's how I do it.
Yeah, we have an expression in Judaism: change your place, change your fortune. And you've sort of put an interesting angle on it that I hadn't really thought about before, that it's not merely something that's metaphysical, it's something that is deeply psychological, that when I'm in the same place, literally or figuratively, then I'm likely to keep doing the same things because the environment is connected with those habits. And when I put myself in a different place, then naturally I'm going to be exposed to different stimuli that are going to help me respond differently and act differently and change the things that need to be changed.
Yeah, that takes a lot of courage. It does. So by the time that someone has decided that they are going to try and change their place, what percentage do you think actually follow through?
Well, I was going to say unfortunately, but maybe fortunately, the people who come to me are a higher percentage likely to actually change because they've self-selected into working with someone like me. It's the people who never self-select into getting help and finding out their barriers and doing it. So I don't know. I don't have a good percentage because the people who work with me, a lot of them do create a lot of change.
I would imagine that. I think that you create a safe space for people. I can see in your reading and in your writing and in your presentations, you're very thoughtful, actually.
Oh, thank you. And the thing is, I've been through chaos. You know, some of my personal story is very, very chaotic. And so very rarely can a client come to me and share something where I can't say, yeah, I've been there, done that, understand.
But I don't think we have to be there and have been through that in order to be thoughtful.
No, you don't. It just helps.
And I think sometimes people who've been through experiences do themselves and others a disservice by talking about it too much. Because
they think there's only one way through it.
Yes, and you are an expert. Regardless of what your experience is, you have an amazing skill set in terms of how you think and how you create solutions.
Oh, thank you.
And I think talking about ourselves is sometimes very limiting. And I see that you don't do that all the time. Some people do that all the time, and it limits the scope of what they offer.
I go back to the point about being courageous. It's really fascinating to me. I recently had an opportunity to solicit a number of people to critique some work that I was doing, and the responses were fascinating because the ones who had suggestions on how I could improve. I mean, it's always nice when people tell you, "Oh, it's wonderful, it's great, it's terrific." You know, we like to hear that, but it's much more useful when people tell you, here's how you can improve. And some of the respondents were very direct, which I appreciated.
You're welcome.
Others were hyper cautious, just couched in so many caveats. You know, this is just my opinion, and it could be that you could do this a little different. And it's like they're terrified that they're going to offend me, which I don't really blame them for. I assume it comes from experience. That when people ask for advice and then you give it to them, they get very offended.
There is that old saying, giving advice is dangerous, giving good advice is deadly.
It can be. It's interesting.
But if we really want to improve, if we really want to make our own lives better, you know, I've pointed out before that the Hebrew word for rebuke is related to the word that means to validate. Because when I'm giving you correction, I'm saying, I believe that you have the capacity to do better, and I want to help you become a better version of yourself. And why would we not appreciate that?
As long as that is the intent. I mean, you can certainly be rebuked by people whose whole goal is to tear you down.
Oh,
that's the thing.
Yeah.
And some people give us negative feedback, especially people when we're younger, because they're afraid we're going to break our hearts with failure. And so they do more damage by setting that limit of what we should do. I had someone told me I was too kind, that I should not get a higher degree. And I luckily, I thought it was kind of funny. So I didn't, I have a big brother, so I have a thick skin, and so I always thank him all the time. Thanks for helping me not take some criticism seriously. But I think many people get very beaten down by what they're not allowed to do. Or like in your case, they misjudge you because of who you are. So one of your stories that I was just shaking my head at is you being told that you were average.
Oh yeah.
Which I think is funny as all get out. Now, on the one hand, I know that spurred you on, without even talking to you, you have such a fighting spirit. I mean, you PhD in Rutgers, you've done this, you've done that. I mean, you're all over the place with super success. So I know it didn't stop you. I'm sure it hurt you.
It did for many years.
Yes, but you came back
years.
from it.
Yeah.
What helped you come back from it? Now, that's not the question I was going to ask, but what did help you come back
okay.
from it?
Yeah. So, well, the fact that I was average. So when my father wanted to marry me off when I was 18, and yes, that is exactly what it sounds like. He married me off at 18. I wanted to do what I was supposed to do. I was the good girl, and I'm a woman, and I certainly can't lead because I'm too emotional. And so when my father picked a man that I should marry, I did. And it's a long story, and I won't get into it. It's a funny story, but I ended up getting out of it because the drug cartel he got involved with didn't like me, and they wanted me out of the way. And so fortunately for me, they convinced him that he could do better than me and he'd be better off without me. So he threw me out.
Very smart of you. Good strategy.
And so, but I came out of that marriage and I felt like a failure. And my father called me and, gave me the whole speech about if I had been appropriately submissive, I would have been able to make it work. And I felt a lot of shame, I failed. I didn't do what I was supposed to do. Now I'm going to go to hell, like all of the things. And it took me a long time to realize I can't do anything about that. And so I can either stay here in this shame space and do nothing with my life, or I can make a choice. And so I made a choice and made my own mistake. I married a narcissistic, closeted bisexual, but that's a different story.
That sounds interesting, though.
It was.
If someone is in that shame space, what do you suggest we tell them so we can be of support?
Okay. So the thing about shame is that it is self-induced. It's like guilt. Other people can pack your bags, but you have to choose to go on a guilt trip.
I'm going to disagree with you.
You don't think
shame is external?
Well, so it's put on you, but you can choose internal. Not to accept it.
Right.
And that's what I decided is, yes, my dad could shame me and he could say all these things and he could tell me
he did shame you, yes.
Yes. And I could either choose to take that as valid and feel it and stay there, or I could say, no, you're wrong. And I am not going to tolerate that. And I'm going to do something else.
And you did.
That's when I say when it's internal, it means I get a choice whether I'm going to accept that baggage.
And you did not.
I did not. I did for a little while.
Well, okay, because good girls listen to what their daddies say. Mm-hmm. But no daddy is perfect. Even they do the best they can. And sometimes it's just wrong. Mm-hmm. So what do we say to somebody who is limiting themselves because of that shame space?
Well, I mean, you're asking me, but I think you probably have just as much advice on this as I do.
I do, but I figured it's your story, and you're very eloquent about it. And this is kind of what you do. How do we move someone thoughtfully beyond the shame space?
Mm-hmm. So the thing that I do with my clients is I give them a chance to tell the story. Tell me your perception of what actually happened. You know the difference between perception and reality. Perception is what you think. Reality is what I think.
So that's very good.
So my question is, what is your reality? And then I start gently kind of testing that. Well, is that what happened? Is that true? Do you believe that? What if it was different? What would it look like if it was different? And when you gently invite someone, and I use the motivational interviewing techniques, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Doc. And when you gently invite someone to observe themselves and kind of look at what could I make different and what would it be like if it were different, they'll move through on your own. What I know doesn't work is when you tell people, stop feeling that way and change it. That's not a thing.
Snap out of it. Yeah.
Right.
Get over it.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about more shame.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the world is grateful that you got out of it.
Thank you. I am too.
Yeah, and you're doing some pretty amazing things. So now, Rabbi, here's the question you and I always get to, and I'm going to ask both of you this. What does all of this have to do with ethics? So either of you can answer, or
Rabbi,
both.
you go first. I've been talking a lot.
Well, you are the guest, but Rabbi always has good answers.
One of the things that I seem to be dealing with a lot these days, is things not working the way they're supposed to and people not doing what they're supposed to do. And you know, you could look at it just as a matter of competence. If what is it the Peter principle that every person rises to his level of incompetence,
That's the Peter principle.
which is a sort of a systemic problem that we won't go into too much. But if I commit myself to do a job, I mean, what you mentioned, Dr. Robin, I could learn the skills myself. And if I'm determined to do the job, then I'm obligated to learn the skills myself, or I'm obligated to find someone else to whom I can subcontract. And if I don't choose one of those options, then I'm really guaranteeing the job is not going to be done properly. And that is unethical, because people are going to suffer if I'm not doing my job well. And certainly I'm going to suffer. So inflicting pain on myself is also unethical. I shouldn't be doing that either. And so finding, making that commitment and developing the skills and developing a plan and a strategy, this is all integral to making sure that things get done the way they need to get done for the benefit of all of us.
Yeah. And in my space, kind of piggybacking on that, I see a lot of coaches who they do the easy part of the job, which is going into somebody's emotional attic and emptying up the trunk of all their emotional stuff and doing therapy when they're not qualified to do therapy. And what they do is they end up leaving all of the emotional stuff laying all over the attic. And they hold up the trunk and say, "Oh, your trunk's empty. You're okay now. Off you go." And instead of the stuff being in a trunk where at least it was safe and not being tripped over, is now laying all over the place for people to trip over. And so I think that ethically, it's my responsibility to make sure that I leave people in a better place than I found them, and not go into situations that I'm not qualified to handle, and not allow people to end up in a space where they're unable to manage their daily life because they came to talk to me. I think that's unethical. And I see it a lot in the coaching space, and it frustrates me.
Well, we see ethics in what you do. Rabbi, can I tell the story about when Dr. Robin was on your podcast?
Oh, yeah, sure.
One of the things the rabbi told me, which touched my heart, was you were talking about a topic and then you asked, "Shall I recuse myself?" Because you had had the similar experience. And I think that very few people have the courage and the ethical foundation and awareness to ask, is that something I should not address because it's a conflict of interest, or I should recuse myself because maybe I'm too close to the subject, maybe I won't answer it in a thoughtful enough way. And that kind of ethical courage is what I see in many of your works. And I think that one of the ways that the Rabbi and I talk about people being ethical is by aspiring to grapple with the gray, which is the Rabbi's good book and podcast. He's got a podcast where he invites people and they grapple the gray on various ethical issues, which I find delightful.
And that's the one we're talking about. And I would even add to what you're saying, Doctor, that Dr. Robin, you could have just as easily thought or said, "Well, since I went through this case myself, I am now eminently qualified.
I'm the expert now."
Right. Rather than maybe the anti-expert.
And that may in fact be true.
But you know what's interesting though is I ended up arguing for the side of the conversation that I didn't choose when I was in the situation.
Yes, which was doubly showed doubly intellectual integrity. But that you first asked the question, should I be on the show? And you let me make the call as the host. And that's, it goes back to your point, which I love, that perception is, my reality is my, how do you say it? My perception is what I think, and reality is what you think.
Perception's what you think. Reality is what I think.
Yeah.
I think that's perfect. I think being ethical is a call to action. And I think that one of the things you're proposing, I think, is that there's ethics as a coach that are going to propel you to do the very best for your clients and to help them reach their ultimate choice for performance. I mean, not everyone chooses to be high performance. So,
Right, and that's the thing. I can't push someone into something that isn't for them. That would be
or
unethical.
for them then. I mean, not everyone's ready for that now. And I think all of us, the three of us do coaching, we've all said, perhaps this is not the time for you to do this. Why don't we, revisit this conversation when you're ready to address this issue, or when things are going better in your life, or whatever. Certainly all of us have done that. And with good results. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
one of all our heroes, I presume, is Abraham Lincoln. But he's one of those figures that we learn about for a few days in like second grade, and then think we know who he was. I read the biography, Team of Rivals, which just puts him in such an extraordinary light. He surrounded him with people who didn't think like he did, and who didn't think like each other. And he was warned not to. But he wanted different voices, and he listened to all of them. And then he would make choices that were almost universally unpopular because he had this incredible supernatural sense of timing. And even though when something was the right thing to do, he recognized it wasn't the right moment to do it. And he had the integrity and the courage and the patience to wait when everybody on one side is telling him, you should have done it already. And everybody on the other side is saying, you shouldn't do it at all. And to wait for the right moment when it would actually be effective.
and isn't that one of the secrets of high performance? For people to learn how to listen to their own timing, their own instincts?
Yeah, recognizing the timing, knowing when to move, knowing when to wait, all of that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think being high performance takes a whole lot of courage. I'm glad that people have you as they work toward that amazing goal that I think makes the world a better place.
And it requires not compromising to the mediocre middle. I think that that's one of the things that high performers often do, is that they give in about things because they want to compromise. They want to be, rather than saying, I want to do this, and not in a way that, oh, I'm taking advantage of other people, but this is what matters to me. And then you have to deal with, am I being selfish, which is a whole separate problem in high performance.
Well, that's a whole nother presentation, isn't it? Or discussion, the holy shift selfishness.
Mm-hmm.
Rabbi, we'll have to redo that one again too. That's a great topic.
Mm.
Well, speaking of, just other things, I was intrigued in your bio that you have a dog named Nebula.
I do.
And you're teaching Nebula to do circus tricks.
Yep.
I just got to know about this. Please spill.
Yeah. So, well, we got this great little dog. She's a rescue. I got her DNA done because they told me that she was a border collie. And I grew up with border collies because I grew up on a beef ranch. And as soon as we got her, I was like, this is a nose to the ground dog. This is not an eyes up dog. So I did her DNA, and it came back fox terrier, pit bull, Australian shepherd, dachshund, schnauzer, hound.
Wow.
So she's super, super smart. And we had to find a way to keep her busy because she's got one of those minds that if you don't give her a job, she'll become an entrepreneur and you won't like what she does. And so I just started going on YouTube. I went to the library, got some books, and started looking for like, what kind of tricks can I, because I taught her all the basic things like, come, sit, stay, down, like all of those. I taught her those. I'm like, well, what else can I teach her? So I just started teaching her stuff for fun. And this past week, actually, for the very first time, she joined me on stage when I did a keynote. And I was doing my keynote, the 5 steps paradigm to creating success out of chaos. And the example that I used throughout was teaching her to do a handstand, because for a dog to do a handstand is chaos. It's head down, belly exposed. And so I used that example throughout. And then at the end, she came up and did like, I don't know, a dozen or so circus tricks with me. So that was a lot of fun. First time she's ever been on stage.
Well, I think that's brilliant. I also like the idea of they'll become entrepreneurs, but you won't like what they do. That's a great keynote for leaders in terms of inviting and inciting people to learn new things and to broaden their scope of high performance.
Yeah.
I think that is a great keynote.
You have to keep people
It's the
engaged.
nebula effect.
The nebula. Yeah, we call her Nebby. She was here. She just walked away.
Well, you see mine. Mine was a rescue too. Her biggest trick is that she can get anyone to love her.
Oh, hey, that's good. Gotta love
Yeah.
that. Definitely.
We didn't have to teach her that though.
You go back to that point, you want your people to have initiative. And, all this talk about quiet quitting these days. You want people to feel they're members of the team, that they're respected, and that they have a certain amount of, I'm tired of this word agency, but that they have autonomy. They're allowed to take initiative. But there has to be a sufficient structure and respect for the system for them to exercise that autonomy in a way that is not the kind of entrepreneurship that you're describing.
Well, and that's what you're teaching people how to do, create psychological safety for themselves and for their teams.
And that requires creating the space where, as a leader, they can come to me and say, I don't know what I'm doing. And they don't get shamed and just thrown back in the fire and say, well, figure it out.
Right.
Yeah. And even I don't like what I'm doing, or I don't think this works. I think that I forget where was it, maybe in a talk show that I listened to of yours, you talked about getting excited as a leader when people disagree with stuff, which I know Abraham Lincoln would appreciate.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. It's interesting.
And you can end up in that space where people are overworked, overwhelmed, and underutilized. And that is never good.
It is not. Well, Rabbi, do we have a word of the day that's been inspired by our Dr. Robin?
We do.
Well, good.
And actually, a story came to mind, if you don't mind.
I never mind your stories.
I don't know if I've told this one before, but everybody knows the greatest Jewish leader in history was Moses, greatest Torah leader. The second greatest Torah leader was someone not as well known outside the Jewish community. It was Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva was an illiterate shepherd for the first 40 years of his life. And he was tending the sheep of his employer, who was one of the wealthiest men in Jerusalem. And his master's daughter, her name was Rachel, came walking by one day, and we don't know exactly how the conversation went, but presumably she said hello, he said hello. They started chatting, and she quickly recognized that this was a person of extraordinary wisdom, even though he had no formal education. And after further conversation, she said, if you would study, you could become a great sage and a great leader. And he said, well, that's a nice idea, but I am a shepherd. I have a job to do. And, back then you couldn't just go online and start taking some night courses. Well, she said something extraordinary. She said, well, you have so much potential. If you would commit yourself to study, I'd marry you and I'd support you. And he took her up on it. And you can guess her father was not pleased.
Not.
And cut them off. And they lived in poverty for many years. And he subsequently became the greatest sage in the history of the Jewish people, second only to Moses.
Wow.
I've not heard of him.
Well, many have it outside the Jewish world, but she was an extraordinary coach. And you talk about being a submissive wife. I don't think she saw herself as a submissive wife. I think she saw herself as a partner who was helping someone that she believed in achieve something extraordinary. And that success was theirs together. And so we talked about, right, you, Dr. Robin, talked right at the beginning about having a vision of where you want to go and crafting a plan of how you want to get there. So the word that came to mind is hijira. You're familiar with the word Hajj. And Hajj is a pilgrimage. And I believe it's derived from this word hijira. That means a flight or a journey to a more agreeable location.
How do you spell that, Rabbi?
H-E-G-I-R-A. Hijira.
Thanks.
And this really should be, and as we should see our lives as pilgrimage. We are all travelers. And we are all headed for a final destination that until we get to the end of our lives, we are on that journey. But there are many stops along the way. And if I'm not finding success, if I'm not finding peace of mind, where I am now, then either figuratively or literally, I need to uproot myself and move to a situation where there will be different stimuli, there will be different circumstances. I will surround myself with different people. I will find the coaches and the supporters and the encouragers, the cheerleaders that are going to help me develop myself, fulfill more of my potential, and live the kind of life that I want. And you, Dr. Robin, are doing that for the people that you serve. And really, we should all be doing it for the people around us, and look for the people that are going to do it for us.
Yeah. The thing about that is you have to make a choice. You know, I could still be living on a 55-acre catfish farm in a house that was a slab of concrete, plywood walls, and a tin roof, where I had to cut the grass because it grew under the walls, where the water heater was so small that I could either shave one leg or wash my hair. And I had to make a choice that that was not going to be the life that I was going to lead. And I think that that's the first step to going on that journey, is making that choice.
And sometimes, you know, in a case like you're describing, I think many of us would say, well, you had a good motivation to get yourself out of there. Many of us are in situations that, you know, it's not so bad. It's not, I don't have big problems. I'll just accept where I am.
It would have been easier for me if I had
Yeah.
just accepted where I was. And as far as my family relationships, it certainly would
yeah.
have been easier.
Yeah.
I think status quo, no matter how miserable, is always in some ways easier to maintain.
The devil,
in
you know.
fact, there's a lot of chaos that gets created when we decide to shoot for the moon, or even just less messy life. Maybe the moon is not even in the scope yet.
Yeah. I
It's
talk about
interesting.
default life, which is kind of you stay along whatever path it is, and created life, which is you make it better. And that space between your default life and your created life is where the chaos happens.
Well, so what's your next adventure, Dr. Robin?
Well, you told me not to talk about work. So
Well, no, the work you can do, then the next one's what's for fun. So you can
yeah.
talk about work for this one.
So for me, I have my Quick Hits podcast. Rabbi's been on it. It's 10 people, one topic. 4 people, 10 minutes, one topic. And I really enjoy doing that. And so I'm, working on how do I make that even bigger and better and more interesting. So that's definitely in my scope of things that I'm doing. And then for fun, we're coming into fall. So for me, summertime is fun because I can bike ride and I can be outside with the dog. And we have a little cart for the dog to ride in on the boat so she can go bike riding with us. So for fun, I don't know what's next for me. I got to put down the garden for the winter. That's up next, I think.
Well, that does sound like fun. That's very good. So final words of wisdom for our listening audience. You've given us a lot to think about. What is a take home?
I think the take home is you don't have to accept the default. You can choose. And that doesn't mean you have to. I'm not going to judge you if you decide that the default is where you want to be. That is perfectly fine. But you do get to choose. I feel like a lot of people don't feel like they have choices, and you always have a choice.
I think it's a good way to say it. Is you can choose the default, which is not the same as simply defaulting to the default.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that's well said. And I think that people get confused between a grand life and a chosen life. And for many people, the default is a very simple, beautiful life. Does not have to be one of one achievement after another that is external. It could be peace and joy and being a good father or grandmother or aunt or whatever, a good family member, a good friend.
Yeah.
I think those simple lives are high performance lives as well.
I got to tell you, being in 2 really bad marriages has made me so thankful for the peaceful, quiet, wonderful relationship I have with the man I'm married to now.
Well, we're happy you found him and
happy
chose
for you.
him.
I had to ask him out 4 times, but
And we're happy for him too.
Yes, that's very nice.
Thank you.
I'm glad you found each other. Well, everyone, here we are with Dr. Robin. Dr. Robin, what's the best way people can reach you?
LinkedIn is really easy just because with a name like Odegaard, it's easy to find me on LinkedIn. My website is drrobinodegaard.com, which if you're on Zoom, you can see it there in my picture. Those are the two best ways to find me. All my contact information is on there.
And Robin is Robyn. Odegaard is Odegaard.
Thank you.
And that way you can find her. Well, everyone, we'll see you on the next episode of the Rabbi and the Shrink. Thanks for joining us, and may you reach for your own moon. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Rabbi and the Shrink, Everyday Ethics Unscripted. To book Dr. Redshoe, Dr. Margarita Gurri, or Rabbi Yonason Goldson as speakers or advisors for your organization, contact them at therabbiandtheshrink.com. This has been a Dr. Redshoe production.